Looks like we've got a nice group here, and we may have others joining us. So, and as usual, we have some interesting questions to entertain here. And yeah, let's start talking about this stuff.
Culadasa, do you maybe want to give me the ability to record so I can make a backup for you?
Oh, that's a wonderful idea. Yes. Just let me do that.
Thanks very much. Sorry to interrupt.
That's there. You can now record.
Thanks very much.
Let's see. There, yes, it shows you're recording. Good. All right. Wonderful. Haven't talked for a while, so my vocal cords need to loosen up a little bit. All right, let's see. What we want to do is, I'm going to open up the, here we go. Here's where we have the questions. And starting with the oldest question, from 2 weeks ago. Santanu is interested in the Buddhist take on free will. Is there no free will, or is there limited free will? So those are general questions. And then a little bit more specifically, Santanu asked, why is it that some people are able to quit their addictions while there are others who are equally motivated but are unable to do so? And yeah, so there's a lot to talk about with both of these. And we'll begin with the general question of, is there such a thing as free will? What is free will? How free is it? Well, the term free will is problematic because it assumes that there is some entity that is exercising its free will. Sort of the simple view that we have a mind or a soul or a spirit.
Sorry to interrupt again, Culadasa. Jennifer, could you mute your microphone for us? Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Culadasa.
Thank you. Right. So it comes from a relatively limited perspective, and that I think what we need to realize that usually free will is being set in opposition to determinism. And so the question is everything absolutely determined by the events that have gone before? Or does an entity, and we can leave aside the idea of a self or a soul or anything like that. We just take what we know and experience in ourselves and others as an individual mind. Now, so what we're really asking is does everything that person do and everything that person experience, was that predetermined? Now this was a question that It's kind of rooted in the Newtonian view of the universe, which suggests that if you could know the exact position and momentum of every particle in the universe, that you would be able to predict everything that would happen for all time. And that in itself is just totally unrealistic. From a scientific point of view, it's untenable. We know so much more. We've learned so much more. And especially just in the last century, in the last half century, the interconnectedness of everything goes much farther than we ever imagined that it did. And the simple idea that you could predict what's going to happen in the future, I'm trying to avoid getting into too much metaphysical and philosophical territory with this, but it's difficult not to. What has become more and more evident, the more we know, the more we learn, is that what there are probabilities, and the probabilities are contingent upon an absolutely infinite, unimaginably infinite number of different factors that are determining the probabilities. And it is the nature of probability is that it's a statement that we can make that something is more or less likely to happen than something else, comparatively speaking. And it's become more and more obvious that as far as predicting that, there are very sound reasons to believe that never can be predicted. But the nature of reality is not deterministic, it is probabilistic. Now, if we also think in terms of systems, very complex systems, and at this point in time, the most complex system that we know of is the human brain. And we're just beginning to understand its degree of complexity. And of course, there is a direct connection between the human brain and the human mind. Now, in every millisecond, for that matter, in every Planck moment, that's the smallest unit of time that we can distinguish. From one Planck moment to the next, there is just an infinite number of things, processes, interconnected processes that are unfolding. And so let's say that you're in the process of making a decision. Let's say it's a decision that has moral implications. Let's say that you have, well, what we know, let's not say, what we know for a fact is that the very, very complex system that is your mind-brain has within it, in each moment, influences from absolutely everything, every previous moment that it has existed, right? And these are all playing some role to a greater or lesser degree in what that mind brain will do in the next moment. If we were talking about free will in the sense that you are in this position of making a moral decision or a decision with moral implications, and suggest that what you did was completely, that somehow there was anything other than a hugely complex system, that there was something that could exercise a kind of choice independently of all those influences, I think we realize that that's kind of a nonsensical idea. But the most important thing is we arrived at that moment through all of these previous moments. We did make choices in many of those previous moments, consciously or unconsciously. Let's put it this way. The probability function that existed in every one of those moments did collapse, and it did produce a particular outcome. And that outcome was a reflection of the probabilities. It could have been an outcome that had less than 1% probability, or it could have been an outcome that had very high level of probability, 99% or something like that. And of course, 99 out of 100 times, it would be the time it has it would be the outcome that had the 99% probability. But there were always those times that something with a lesser probability. The more interesting case is a situation where there's a 50-50 probability, a complete, absolutely equal probability. Now, a decision doesn't happen in a single moment. A decision unfolds over a series of moments. As a matter of fact, just what we know from brain physiology is that some part of your mind, some part of your mind brain will make a decision, and over the course of the next 200 milliseconds, before you become conscious of it, it's possible for that decision made by that part of your mind brain to be altered by other parts of your brain mind. And then at some point, there arises the consciousness of it. The other thing that we know is that consciousness is kind of like looking out the back window. By the time we become conscious of a decision, it's already happened. It's already a done deal. It's already in the past. So, but what happens when we make a decision? It takes time. And in that time, various parts of your brain-mind system are interacting with each other. And at some point, some critical point is reached where, of all the different probabilities that have been shifting back and forth, millisecond by millisecond, it just settles into a single choice, a single action that arises from that. Now, was that an exercise of free will? Was it deterministic? And the answer is neither. But what the important part of it is, when those different parts of your mind-brain system were processing that decision, which ones of them were involved, which ones of them were not? What past experience, what knowledge, what information What influences played a role with each one of those? Now, so many different factors added up to that decision. The real question that lies behind this is there any point in me holding the intention to practice, well, to practice anything? I was going to say to practice morality, but to practice anything. Is there any point in us trying to control what our future self is and does? And the answer that comes from this little scenario that we've just looked at is absolutely. And from the point of view of linear thinking, we might say that, okay, what happens in this moment has a tiny influence. But that's not true, because I think you're all familiar with the butterfly effect, especially when you're talking about very complex systems, self-organizing systems. Like I say, the brain-mind is the most complex system that we know of in existence, other than perhaps the universe as a whole, including all of the different mind-brain systems that may exist in any part of it. So that system is constantly creating itself. You can create who you are in the future. You do that cumulatively over time. It doesn't stop with there was unconscious processing of information that took place. That unconscious processing ended up in a decision to take path A rather than path B. It doesn't end with that, okay? Because whether you chose path A or path B will have consequences. Whether or not you pay attention to those consequences, whether or not you become aware of those consequences, is going to determine how the consequences of your action will affect future actions. That in turn is something that's determined by your past behavior. When we're talking about training the mind in meditation, in study of Dharma, listening to teachers, reading books, anything for that matter, just the process of living, we are creating ourselves continuously. All of these little things add up. You are who you are right now because of all of the things that have happened, all of the ways you responded to those things, all of the ways you have recognized, interpreted, or failed to recognize and interpret the results of those things. How that observation of the results of your action has been incorporated into subsequently acquired knowledge from other experiences or other people or things like that. All of this goes into the process of shaping you. You are a self-organizing system. Now, many things happen by accident. Someone may eventually become enlightened, and it all started because they were a university student, and they were really attracted to this girl, and when they walked up to her and said the usual kinds of things, and she happened to mention that, oh, well, I'm going to my meditation class tonight. And so with absolutely no knowledge or interest in meditation at all, he says, oh, sounds interesting. You mind if I come along? Well, you know what he's really all about, right? But that event, that decision, could result in him eventually becoming a highly awakened individual. It could end up in him being something who changes the course of many lives and things like that. So, in a sense, if we think of ourselves as a system, and as a system that's part of a larger system consisting of the environment we interact with, which in turn is a part of a much larger system, which is all of the people, there's all the people that we have the first degree of connection with, but then there's the influence of all that we have a second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh degree of connection with. And indeed, everything is playing a role in shaping us. But this particular system that is in our mind brain is in the center of this nexus of causality. It has the potential to shape itself. It doesn't really have the potential to determine how the probability wave is going to collapse in a particular moment, in that moment. But it has the ability to determine how the probabilities that will arise and how that probability wave will collapse in the future through all of its cumulative actions one by one. That's what the training in the meditation and Dharma is about. One thing that you train to do in meditation is to observe your mind, to observe your emotions, to observe the events that happen in the world, to observe the things that influence the way you behave, to observe the consequences of your behavior. By training the mind, and it doesn't matter how you ended up starting to train the mind, every single time you end up sitting down on the cushion and practicing some more, and all of the myriad of factors that would come into that, which method, which teacher, everything else. Everything that you've read, everything that you've responded, every way that you've responded to something you've heard, all of these things is shaping who you are. So let's throw determinism out completely, all right? You are a self-organizing system. You are an unfolding series of probabilities that are contingent on absolutely everything that's happened anywhere, everywhere, throughout all time. But there is a property of that brain-mind system, which is what we refer to as its autopoietic or self-organizing capacity, which accomplishes over time exactly that which the question of free will versus determinism was trying to answer. The question was just framed in the wrong way. What you do is really important. If you decide that there's no point in doing anything, that's a major decision that is going to change everything that happens in your life from that point forward. So the idea of some kind of determinism, and especially the idea of surrendering to the idea that there's no point in trying to do anything because everything is predetermined, it's absurd. It's out the window. The idea that we could look at ourselves and say, I have free will. I shouldn't have done that. Well, we have that capacity. If we assume that therefore we're a horrible, bad person and we're guilty of not making the right decision, or even what we're more likely, equally likely to do is to look at somebody else and say, that person did something harmful, and therefore that person could have made another decision. Well, that kind of presumption is just as absurd as a presumption of determinism. That kind of free will does not exist. but we can direct the course of our lives and the unfolding of our lives. We can, by doing so, affect, and we will, we cannot avoid affecting the unfolding of absolutely everything. So I hope that, I guess the main point that I'd like to make for you is in answering this question, is that the free will question and the inherent versus determinism that is present in the very idea of free will are not really, they are such poor facsimiles of anything that resembles reality that we need to set them aside. When it comes to why we would ask the question, there's a positive response. We can, and we do, whether we do it intentionally or not, determine who we are and what happens in the future. And it goes beyond ourselves individually. Now let's look at the second part of this question, which kind of brings it down to earth. Why is it that some people are able to quit their addictions while there are others who are equally motivated but are unable to do so? Well, what we have here is a situation where, let's compare two people. There's a person who, well, let's compare three people. We'll have a person who is not particularly addiction prone. They may have tried and played around with a lot of addictive behaviors, but none of them really took hold of them. And then we have our two other people who instead are much more prone to addictive behaviors. One of these people is able to, upon recognizing the harmful nature of that addiction, is able to overcome it. The other one is not. Or at least all we can say is up to the point in time where we've assembled our group of three people, that that person hasn't been able to. That does not mean that that person couldn't. But what it means is that the person that was addiction prone, the person that was addicted but was able to overcome their addiction, and the person that hasn't so far been able to overcome their addiction have been shaped by different influences, genetic influences, all kinds of life influences. There is no question at all that, just absolutely no question at all, that addictive behaviors, in addition to whatever genetic component there may be, and there are people who have genes that would predispose them to addiction but never become addicted to things, that all of these other life experiences are going to determine how they respond to different things in just the way that I've talked about. So to look at the person who has never been seriously addicted to anything, maybe drank coffee for a while but quit, maybe tried smoking cigarettes but didn't like it, maybe even used heroin 2 or 3 times but said, no, I don't want to go where this is taking me, whatever it is. And we say, oh, well, that's that fortunate person. Well, they are a fortunate person, but they're that way as a result of causes and conditions. They won't necessarily always be that way. People who have never been prone to addiction do become addicted. Things happen in their life which trigger something. something painful that they never manage to deal with that pain. And then they end up engaging in some kind of addictive behavior to, and addictions come in many sorts. One kind of addiction is the workaholic. So somebody can even become a highly productive workaholic member of society, become wealthy or become famous or become politically influential or whatever. But that can be an addiction, and it can be an addiction that is a way of escaping a kind of inner pain that they've never been able to deal with. Our other two people who became addicted more easily have probably had a background where there's a lot more pain and a much greater predisposition to seize onto anything that even temporarily alleviates that pain. Even when their prefrontal lobes tell them, in the long run, this is going to cause you more suffering than the suffering that you escape from by means of it. But they can change. One of them has already found the way to change. The other one always has a potential to. What we hope for is that we will learn and understand more and more about how these things happen so that we can help all people with addictions come to a place where they overcome those addictions. And of course, the ideal way of overcoming an addiction is to overcome the unresolved pain that the addiction is an attempt to escape from. Often the person that succeeds in overcoming their addiction has not resolved that pain. It's just they've found other ways to compensate and they live with that pain. That's not necessarily the ideal outcome. And that's why they say, once an alcoholic, once an addict, you're always an addict, you're always an alcoholic. Because in the vast majority of cases, we haven't really overcome that very factor which has made us, or combination of factors which has made us prone to addiction. The important point of the free will aspect of this is that the potential for change is there. That is one of the most incredibly wonderful things that the Buddha taught us. That's when he took the primitive doctrine of karma and he said, karma is intention. And it is through our karma that we create our futures, not in terms of what happens to us, but in terms of who it happens to. This is the most incredibly powerful, wonderful things that we could have learned about ourselves. We can change ourselves no matter what. We can go from delusion to awakening. We can go from addiction to freedom from addiction. We can go the other way too. We can go deeper into delusion, and we can go into addictive and other harmful behaviors. But the fact is that we can play an active role in how that happens. We're not condemned by some kind of determinism to a particular outcome. We're only predisposed, and it can all change. And in the case of addicts, what we hope to do is someday learn enough that we know how to make the changes necessary, that there are no more addicts. And maybe ultimately there are no people that carry the kind of inner pain that would make them become addicted to something to escape that inner pain. That's what we'd like to do. What we do.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Sintan. What we do know is that there are three distinct centers in the brain. One produces the experience of unpleasantness, every degree of unpleasantness. Another one produces the experience of pleasantness in every degree. There is a third one that is interconnected with these, but at the same time completely separate. It's what the physiologists call the wanting center. It's what I would call the craving center. Now, of course, the only reason we experience pleasantness and unpleasantness is so that we will want to do those things that are not harmful to ourselves. When we're experiencing unpleasantness, we will have a desire to change things so that that unpleasantness goes away. That's that craving center that gets activated. And we're programmed so that things that are good for us, at least when we were hunter-gatherers, sugar was good for us because it always came in forms that were packed with vitamins and minerals and other good things, right? And sugar is a very important energy source. So pleasure, we experience pleasure from the taste of sugar. That's the way these things are supposed to work. That wanting center, I think it's a really good thing to call it a wanting center rather than a craving center, because it becomes a craving center when it gets out of control. It's a wanting center when it performs the function that it came in, that evolved for, that it came into existence for. The word the Buddha used for craving was tanha, which literally means thirst. How often do you ever get thirsty? Really thirsty? How often do you experience true thirst? Not very often. When you experience thirst, it dominates your behavior, your thoughts, everything else. Why don't you experience thirst very often? Why is it so unusual? It's because you have habits. You have a habit of drinking coffee or tea. You have a habit of taking in fluids during the day. That's part of it. Another thing is, if your mouth is a little bit dry, it occurs to you, if you're walking past a water fountain, well, not in these COVID days, but in the old days, you're walking past a water fountain to stop and have a drink. Or if you're at home, to go into your kitchen and have a glass of water or make a cup of tea or something like that. That's not craving. That's that center behaving the way it's supposed to. That's not thirst. That's the kind of behavior that keeps us from ever becoming thirsty. So addiction is about a hyperactive, hypersensitized, wanting center. And the craving that causes us all our suffering is a similar hyperactivity of that wanting center that has become established to be associated with certain patterns, right? And so when we change ourselves, we don't cease to have a wanting center. When we overcome craving, and when we overcome the suffering that craving causes, we don't cease to have a wanting center. We don't cease to eat when we're hungry. We don't cease to drink so that we don't become thirsty. We don't cease to put on warmer clothing when we're feeling cold, or take our jacket off when we're feeling too warm. We continue to do those things. They no longer take the form of a compulsion, of a drive, of a compulsion that can cause us to do things that are harmful to ourselves or harmful to others. That's the difference.
Thank you.
So we can go from addiction right into craving, into the whole Buddha Dharma, into overcoming craving for things of the sense realm, overcoming craving for the form and formless, overcoming craving for being versus non-being. Right? So, all right, I think I spent enough time on that one topic. Vladislav has an interesting question about the most common way in which stream entry happens to people. He says, and I'm reading, I am aware of important distinctions between states and traits, and this question is out of pure curiosity. Will we not be used to judge if someone is awakened or not by having some kind of experience? As you've said previously, experiences by themselves are not worth shit. Bearing that in mind, did you notice any trends or commonalities in your students or people you know? And yes, I most definitely have. Here are some questions which make me curious. How often is stream entry accompanied by a cessation? How is it, or is it usually a sudden realization or a more gradual and long-lasting event for most people? Does it happen on the cushion more often or just randomly in daily life? Well, in terms of how stream entry happens, my observation is that sometimes it happens as an event that you can easily recollect and point to. That you can say, I was sitting in meditation this morning and something dramatically shifted, and I've never seen things the same since. And if the change that has occurred meets the definition of stream entry, then that's a stream entry event. Is it always accompanied by a cessation? And here we're speaking specifically of a cessation of mental formations. That's what a cessation event is, a cessation of mental formations. Is it always accompanied by a cessation of mental formations? No, it's not. But the result is a cessation, a permanent cessation. It may not be a temporary experience of a cessation of mental formations. That's not required. But the result, if it's stream entry, will be a relative degree of cessation of delusion, especially with regard to the self-nature, to delusion with regard to believing that there is anything that stands outside the realm of interconnectedness, of cause and effect, of causality. What will fall away is any doubt that the way one sees the world, one has seen the world up to that point, and the way that most people see the world is deluded, that has a huge amount of delusion. There will be a permanent cessation of any doubt that we are all living in a reality that our mind has created, and does not, that there is a greater, more real, more true reality beyond that, because that person is now living that. Now, does stream entry always occur at a particular point in time? Does it always occur in meditation? No, it doesn't. Does it always occur at a particular point in time? No, it doesn't. Some people can't even say when it happened. I've come across people who say, I know it happened during these few days. I realized that something had been changing in me for the last X period of time, and that I was seeing things completely different than I had before. I've encountered people who can't even narrow it down more than it was the summer of 2003, or something like that. Or somehow or another, it seemed to happen over the course of a retreat. Because when I came out of the retreat, I didn't know it when I was in retreat, but when I came out of the retreat, I realized that something had permanently changed. So it happens in many different ways. The cessation event itself, it's just an experience. And you can have a cessation of mental formations As a matter of fact, cessations of mental formations probably are fairly common. But what makes a cessation of mental formations a part of a stream entry experience is if what caused that particular cessation of mental formations was the sort of arriving at a point of all of the insights that you had been cultivating coming together sufficiently to produce a permanent shift, and that permanent shift triggered the cessation event. It's like rebooting your computer. It's like you spend all this time loading the new software in, right? People can update their computers without having to reboot them too. As a matter of fact, a well-designed update, unless it involves some critical level of the operating system, isn't necessarily going to require a reboot. As a matter of fact, requiring a reboot is just it's often something the programmer could have avoided, but it would have meant a whole lot of work to do that. So instead, they're going to have to shut down Microsoft Word. It's the only way they can do their Microsoft 386 upgrade. You know, we know people can become awakened without that. So how often is stream entry accompanied by cessation? I would say it depends. It most likely to happen, to involve a cessation if it happens during meditation, and the form the cessation will take is going to be determined by the kind of meditation the person is doing. Is it usually a sudden realization or a more gradual and long-lasting event for most people? Well, I've already said some people know when the shift took place, others don't, but it doesn't matter. Even for those where it seemed to happen, there was this little short period of time during which the computer rebooted, and but that was the result of a much more gradual process that developed over a longer period of time. That didn't happen all at once. It was a culminating event. That's all. Does it happen on the cushion more often or just randomly in daily life? Well, I think that depends on the individual, but if you're talking about does it happen on the cushion more often or just randomly in daily life, my experience is it's much more likely to happen on the cushion than it is in daily life, but it often does happen in daily life. Not only that, it's more often going to happen during a retreat than it does during your daily meditation at home, but not that much more often. Not that much more often. There's not as big a difference. There's a bigger difference between, yes, it's more likely to happen in meditation than in daily life, but it still happens in daily life a significant number of times. It's a lot more likely to happen in a retreat. It's more likely to happen in a retreat than meditating at home, but not as much more likely as it is to happen in meditation versus in daily life. And let's see, was there another part to that? No, that was basically the question. So also, if you are comfortable with it, could you please describe how your own stream entry happened? Thank you. No, I don't have a problem with that at all. Why anybody would have a problem with that, I don't know. It happened after my youngest son was born, a few months after that, I was in a routine of getting up about 5:30 in the morning. I left to go to the the college that I was teaching at the time. I usually left about 8:30 in the morning, and I would usually get up at 5:30 and I'd meditate for, it would depend, hour and a half, something like that. And the kind of meditation that I was doing at the time was more along the lines of the technique I described as meditation on the mind and the mind illuminated. It had been taught to me as Mahamudra, but I had allowed it to develop in my own experience the way I had. And the experience took the form of not a visual light, but a sort of illumination of understanding. And the only way I could possibly describe it is, it was a kind of cessation event. It was that there was just the pure light of consciousness and no object. That lasted for, there's no way to know for sure, but my guess would probably be something of the order of perhaps as short as a minute, or perhaps as long as 3 or 4 minutes. I don't really know. But then sort of everything came back online again. I was filled with this just utterly exquisite sense of blissful joy and happiness. And I just sat in that space. And I didn't know what had happened. I just knew that it was absolutely wonderful. It was an experience. But when I got up from my meditation, after sitting there longer than I usually would have, just sitting there, basking in that experience, and then I went and had my bath and then got dressed, and I just knew. It was so clear. All the things that I had heard and read about for years and everything like that, it's like they were just obvious. They were so obvious. I'd say the predominant feeling that I had was, I can't understand why. I can't understand why I didn't see things this way my entire life. It's like, it's just the obviousness of it, the self-evidentness of it, that my mind was just, had been, and still was, creating stories, fabrications, that this was the world that I was living in. And yeah, I was a body, I was a person, but there was no self to this person. There was nothing to be attached to. It was all so clear, and it was all so obvious. And I went through the rest of my day doing exactly what I had prepared for my first class. I presented my first class, and my student said, "Hey, Doc, you seem to be in a really good mood today." And I said, "Yes, I am." And so that's what it was like for me. I know when it happened. I know how it happened. It happened in
Thank you.
and it happened. So, William, I took the liberty of answering your question in writing, And well, actually, let me just back up. On any of the things that I've talked about so far, does do any of you have any questions or comments? Would you like to say more, or ask something else, or expand upon it? No, you're okay with it? Good.
With regard to the probability ideas or about free will,
Yeah.
there's a very interesting film to explore
Mhm.
at infinitepotential.org, which is on the life of David Bohm. And David Bohm was the soulmate of Krishnamurti and considered to be the physics teacher of Dalai Lama, or at least the Dalai Lama considered him to be his physics teacher.
Yes, yes.
And it's just a very interesting movie, and it goes into all these things: action or non-local action.
Yes.
I just recommend seeing that.
Infinitepotential.org. Wonderful. I had the privilege of spending 2 days with David Bohm. It was when I lived in Calgary. He came to Calgary. He was doing a presentation at, I can't even remember the name of the, anyway, he was doing a presentation at a college, mostly as a favor to a friend of his there. And I got to pick him up from his hotel and take him up there and spend the whole weekend with him, talk to him. It was absolutely wonderful. Infinitepotential.org. I can't wait to have a look at it. And you know,
it's .com, Culadasa. I've added it in the chat, the link.
okay, great. Yeah. Thank you, William. Thank you very much. Anything else before I head on to the next question?
Culadasa, I think maybe just with regard to the question of free will and everything being interdependently connected. One, I think, and I think this comes up a lot. People sort of go, well, how is it that me sitting down meditating is the best use of my time in order to change the world or make the world a better place? It comes across as, for people who are not familiar with meditation and haven't practiced it, as a very selfish thing to do. You could rather be out, working at a charity or something like that. However, Shinzen Young talked in one of his online, I think it might have been with Michael Taft, where he said even just by meditating and then going out into the day, going about your day, you are having an influence on the world that is positive. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that, just to sort of give some perspective, because I think a lot of people do feel like, why is this a good use of my time, in terms of how we are affecting the world around us?
Well, yes, it sort of begins with realizing that that absolutely anything we do, no matter what it is that we do, is going to affect the world around us. So if you sit in meditation and if you know, which I know you do, my non-duality of mind and matter and the interconnectedness of everything, all of this says to me that just the fact of you sitting in meditation is going to affect the whole universe in one way or another, right? In many different ways that you can never know. But then you get up from the meditation, and to the degree that the meditation is training the mind. It's training the mind, and then supplying the trained mind to the realization of truth, how things are. Whatever little bit of movement that you made in the direction of training your mind or applying that training to a deeper understanding of yourself or the world or your relationship with the world, that's going to affect the way you interact with people all day long. And of course, every one of those interactions is going to ramify out in all kinds of ways. It has many different effects. You can never know all the different effects. That every thought that you experience during the day as a result of your meditation is going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on you in the long term. It may have an impact on the way that you respond to somebody in the immediate term. It's going to have an impact. It's going to affect people around you. If you keep on meditating, if you meditate day after day, if you begin to understand the nature of reality, the entire universe has moved closer to awakening as a result of that. And as you move, and you get off the cushion, you're going to have an even greater impact on the people around you. All of you are meditators. Are there any of you who have not had the experience of people around you, family, friends, things like that, commenting on the way that you've changed in a positive way? Is there anybody that hasn't had that experience yet?
If anything, I mean, personally, I've seen that some of the people who observe me, they've like kind of been shocked by the options of responding to situations, you know, that are available to a person, you know. So it's. I mean, it does. So to add to what you just said, I think happier people add less suffering in the world.
Absolutely. Happier people make other people happier too. Yeah. And unhappy people make other people more unhappy. Right. Yeah. But the reason I mention that is for something to have enough of effect that somebody comments to you on it, then it's affected them. They may not know how it's affected them. They may just think, oh, I've noticed that this has changed. That Pablo's not like he was before, or Juno's not like he was before in this particular way. And Juno, you're not the same as you were before. You used to get, who knows, upset more easily or something like that. It has an impact on them. That's going to change them. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to take up meditation, but they might. It might motivate them to do that sometime. Or it might just make them think about, at an unconscious level, they might just realize, gee, if Ricardo can change and become a happier and more balanced person, why couldn't I? Why couldn't anybody? You don't even know what kind of impact it has, but if somebody commented on it, then that gives you some inkling of the degree of impact that it's had. There's still a place for going out there and feeding the hungry or doing any other kind of good work. Picking up litter beside the highway. It doesn't matter. There's all kinds of room for doing all of these other things. And they have a tremendously valuable impact too. But to think of meditation as somehow selfish is to really well, it's an expression of the very limited thinking that characterizes the typical worldling. So Vladislav selfishly takes an hour a day to himself when he could be doing something for somebody else, and he just does this to make himself happy. Well, they're coming from a place of ignorance. That's the state of the world. The world is in a state of ignorance. So we do these things, and we do it in the hopes that it will eventually make enough difference that perhaps everyone will start undergoing the same kind of change. My goal is to reach a critical threshold that tipping point where the Dharmic point of view becomes the predominant view of society. It becomes the cultural norm. I think there must be some tipping point of people who have at least some kind of meditative skill development, some kind of knowledge of the Dharma, some tipping point that involves some number of people or percentage of people who have achieved stream entry or second path or third path or fourth path or whatever. To the collective effect of all of that would be a dramatic shift, and we need that. We need that really desperately, and we need that very quickly. So I would say in the current state of the world, there is probably not much that you could do that would be ultimately of more advantage to all of humanity and the future of humanity than to sit down and meditate for a period of time each day. We are at such a critical juncture, and the kind of shift that this Dharma is about is our only hope of surviving as a species, or if we survive as a species, preserving any of the good that's come from our cultural development over the last few thousand years. Remember, Einstein says, I don't know what the next world war will be fought with, but I know that the fourth world war will be fought with sticks and stones. And the same thing is true now with all of the other impacts we've had on the planet, including global warming and overpopulation and everything else. I don't know what the future is going to look like for mankind, but or humankind, I should say. But the only hope that there will be anything positive about it is if there is some kind of a global shift in the direction of the Dharmic worldview. So that would be my response to anybody who says you're being selfish when you meditate.
I have a question about that, if I may.
Sure.
So, do you feel like there is a consensus among contemplative teachers about what the Dharmic view would be like?
The degree of consensus depends on the degree of their own experiential development of that. We're climbing a mountain, and the closer you get to the top of the mountain, the more the view, the similar the view. The farther down the mountain you are, the more totally different things look. But once you get to the top of the mountain, it doesn't matter which side you climbed it. The view you have is the same. And the closer you get to the top, the more similar the view. So there's a huge variety of Dharmic views out there. And they're an expression of to what degree that particular teacher has achieved an experiential realization of the content of their teaching. To the degree that they look at what another teacher does and they say, oh, well, that's all wrong. To that degree, they're pretty far down the mountain. To the degree that they can look at what another teacher does and says, yes, that has value too. I think my way, I may say, I think my way will work better for more people more quickly, but that's my opinion based on my experience. But your way is good too. And as a matter of fact, maybe the best thing we could do is combine the best aspects of my way and your way. That's the kind of maturity that develops. So yeah, there's a lot of disparity amongst teachers, and exactly what the Dharmic view is. But that will become a more cohesive commonality of view as more and more of us become more and more awakened. As we continue to ascend the mountain, then we are going to begin to share much the same vista. We're going to be able to see the bigger picture much more clearly, and we'll be able to see the validity of many paths. We'll be able to see that every Dharmic view is just a view, and that includes the view from the top. And well, no, you probably heard me say this before. There's actually not a top. The mountain analogy collapses at a certain point because it implies that there's a top of the mountain. But what we're talking about is is something that goes far beyond what any one human mind is ever going to be able to encompass in a lifetime. So far beyond that, I would say, look how more advanced the human understanding is of the world we live in as compared to an amphibian's. And let's jump ahead in time to where there is another being who has evolved beyond us to the same extent we've evolved beyond an amphibian. They're going to have an understanding of the world, of reality, of truth. It's still not going to be ultimate, but it's going to be compared to our Dharmic view, it's going to be like our Dharmic view compared to the Dharmic view of a frog, right? If you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and...
Culadasa, can I ask a question about your second answer about the stream entry topic?
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking, when you mentioned your own experience of that stream entry you had, it just reminded me of I don't want to say similar experience, but in a way similar experience I had last year on my first 10-day going retreat, where I was already on bed about to sleep, and was maybe like sometime in the middle, so a few days in the retreat already. And I had this thing right before sleeping where I had the similar sense of like I understood everything way deeper, you know, like how reality works on a way deeper level than usual. But what struck me was the reason why I remember this was because I also had the sense of, this is so obvious to me right now. Like that night before sleeping, I was like, this is like this whole thing that I've heard from so many other teachers before. It's so obvious for me in this very moment. Like, of course it's like this, right? And then I was pretty excited. I mean, I was pretty excited that, oh, I made it. I know about this already, right? But the next morning I forgot about everything. So what I'm trying to say is, or ask is, what did exactly happen to me? Like, was that even closer? Was it just like some illusion, some fantasy, some dream? What could that be?
I would prefer to think that what happened is that some part of your mind did really put together a much more profound understanding of things, and it created for you an experience. But and that's wonderful, because your mind has been able to visit that place. Your mind has been able to touch into it. And there is some part of your mind that is never going to forget the understanding that you had at that time. But it was an experience. And what you're looking for, what you're hoping for, is that the next time something like that happens, you'll go from thinking, I understand it all right now, to realizing that, oh, well, there's really a whole lot more that I don't understand. But what I do understand, I will understand forever. I can't ever not know this truth again. I can't ever not see things this way again.
Yeah. Yeah, because definitely in that after that retreat, in the following months after that retreat, I definitely had some shifts in understanding that became permanent up until today, right? But that one that I had that specific night was really like way too far ahead of me in my level of whatever of this journey. So yeah, I completely forgot about it next morning. But definitely I still got some, I understand what you mean, because even though I forgot that one, I got some others that got to stay. Yeah.
Right. Yes, that's wonderful. That is, insight is developing. There are insight experiences that become insights, and we can take insight into things as they really are, and we can break it down into those 5 different components that I described in the introduction: interconnectedness, impermanence, no self, emptiness, suffering. But they're really all aspects of the same thing. And you can have experiences of knowing this, and then you can come to the place where you know it. You really know it. And it'll continue to mature and deepen. That's why after stream entry, there comes second path and third path and fourth path. But that's wonderful. You're on the way. You're on the way. And you may be one of these people, who knows? You can all, if maybe upon reflection, maybe on consultation with an experienced teacher, a knowledgeable teacher, you might already be a stream entrant and have not realized which one of those experiences brought you to that level. But the most important thing the only important thing that I know of about having an answer to the question of, have I reached the level of stream entry, is if I have, then there are certain things that I need to be working on in order to move up to the next path. But even that isn't as critical as it may sound. Like, oh, I've got to go out and find out whether I'm a stream entrant or not, so I know what kinds of things know how to be practicing to attain second path. Because the work is essentially, in the most fundamental sense, it's like a spiral. And you're going to keep working on the same things over and over again, but the degree of understanding and the clarity of your insight is going to increase with every turn of the spiral. You're at a higher level every time it turns. So you don't even really need to know whether you're a stream entrant or not in order to keep progressing on the path. Do what works. Do what is leading. Keep doing what is creating greater clarity of understanding.
Definitely. And then to further study this topic of stream entry and the 4 paths, because it's a thing that I've heard we talk about in these calls, but it's not something that I found in the book, in the TMI book. And I actually checked the index for the word stream entry and I couldn't find it. I don't know is there anything about it in the book or anywhere else where I could learn about these things?
Well, there are places, yes. I can't, not very good at remembering off the top of my head references for things. Bill might have something to offer us on that, in that regard. It's something to read. But the next book that I'm working on right now, I intentionally addressed only the development of samatha vipassana, well knowing that most people, by the time they reach the 10th stage of samatha vipassana, would at least be a stream entry. But I left all that discussion for another book that I'm working on now, which is all about the four paths. It's all about the 10 fetters. It's all about, well, it starts off about what insight is and insight experiences and how they come about and so forth. But Bill, you had a suggestion.
Well, I mean, there's at least a few books that describe those in detail. One, the Handbook of Insight by Mahasi Sayadaw, which goes into great details. I mean, so does Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga, I think. But even the other books by Analayo and Joseph Goldstein about the four foundations of mindfulness, I think they all go into it. The one that I remember for sure is the Mahasi Sayadaw. But in a related question, my understanding is that really being in stream entry means that you realize the illusion of the self, or the illusion of or the fictional nature of the personality. Number two, that you realize the worthlessness of rites and rituals, at least for advancing on the path, and you realize the end of doubt about the path and about one's ability to advance on the path. And that those are really the three characteristics of somebody that's achieved stream entry.
Yes, that is right. Now, what happens is one realizes that the self is a fiction, but what one will remain with until they achieve fourth path is this deep primal gut feeling of being a self. But one will know that it's not true at the same time. So the doubt that you overcome is that you have been living in delusion, that you can overcome that delusion, and that this Dharma is real and that it works. Yes, absolutely. And it's not that rites and rituals are worthless, because they're not worthless, but it's that they have no inherent power of their own. In a sense, it is an affirmation of the causal interconnectedness of everything, of the principle of paticca samuppada. So you realize no self, and you realize paticca samuppada, and you no longer doubt that you have been living in a dream or a nightmare, and that you can wake up. The rites and rituals are not worthless, because they're ways of, just like meditation is a way of changing how your mind functions. Rites and rituals can produce positive states of mind and experiences which can be used skillfully. But to believe that following rules and rites and rituals is going to somehow magically make something happen, that's a fool's gambit. That's what you realize, is it has no inherent power. It's only as a tool to cultivate those same mental skills, to cultivate those positive attitudes, frames of mind, the ability to see the world through eyes of loving kindness and compassion, rather than judgment and condemnation and all of these other things. So.
All right, really interesting thing to get into.
As a matter of fact, one of the most important things about it's actually rules and rites and rituals, because we can look at the rules of conduct, the pancha sila. If you follow those as rules, if you think that if you just do nothing but observe those rules, that something magical is going to happen to you, the only result is going to be that you're going to be a nicer, better behaved person. You're not going to become awakened. But go to the mindful review and look at how I talked about it there. That's the real value of those rules, the Panchasilani, the five rules of conduct, is to look at them in terms of why would I do, first of all, why are these rules of conduct what they are? Well, what they're doing is they're separating behavior that's harmful to myself and others from behavior that's not harmful to myself and others, or even beneficial to myself and others. Okay, why would I do something that's going to be harmful to somebody or harmful to myself? Ah, well, that's arising out of craving and self-clinging. Then, when I notice that my thoughts and my emotions and my intentions are tending towards something that is inconsistent with those rules, that means it's tending towards something that is inconsistent with the principle of harmlessness, that I'm doing something that's going to cause harm to myself or others. That must be coming from craving. Where is the craving? Ah, I come to recognize the craving. Where is the self-clinging that's causing that craving? Ah, I come to recognize that self-clinging every time this happens. And even more importantly, this is going back to the conditioning that happens in every moment. Every single time you decline to speak or act in a way that's rooted in craving, you are less subject to craving, okay? You are less subject to self-clinging. Of course, the opposite is true. Every time you act out of craving, you're more enslaved to craving. Every time you act out of self-clinging, you're more enslaved to self-clinging. But now we can put this into perspective. For a stream entry, for a stream entrant, he no longer deludes himself that this is like the 10 commandments. You obey them and God will send you to heaven after you die. That you follow these rules of conduct to the letter and somehow you will magically become awakened. The truth is that these are tools. They're tools that allow you to overcome craving and self-clinging. They're tools that allow you to achieve wisdom and things like that. So that's just the rules, rites, and rituals are not worthless, but their value is as tools, okay? And when, as a stream entrant, you realize that, now you are capable of using all of those things far more effectively. Because now you understand what they're about.
Yeah, actually, if I can add to that,
Yes.
the way that I think about this, or when I want to explain this to someone, it's these rules and this all the morality that Buddha talks about, and it's not necessarily like it's not something that is not meant to follow blindly like a religion. It's just that once you get enough understanding, or you get deep enough on through meditation, that you realize that if you don't follow these things, you're basically creating more harm for yourself and for others. So it's not like an experienced meditator becomes more compassionate because he has to. It's because it's so deeply obvious for him that if he doesn't, he's basically creating more suffering for him and for others. That of course he's gonna act in a wholesome way. That's the way I cannot. I mean, that's in the level that I'm at right now. I don't think it's too much, but I still understand that. I can still know how much unwholesomeness I have in me. How much conditioning I have, but at least it's intuitively I know this is the way to go. If that makes sense.
Yes. Wonderful, Pablo. Wonderful. Yes.
Culadasa, would you anticipate that someone who's already cognitively taken in this idea regarding rules, rites, and rituals, who's already living from a place of virtue rather than simple ethics or morals, that they would experience, they would still experience a profound shift in that sphere at stream entry? Or do you think that this would be something that would be more pronounced for someone who was living from rules and morals and what have you?
Okay, I'm not totally sure about your question. Now, you're talking about, okay, if somebody is, let's use the word religiously. Somebody is religiously following rules, rites, and rituals, and has not understood how to use them as tools. What's going to happen before they reach stream entry is that they're going to have accomplished what a deeper understanding of the purpose of those rules would have been a tool for getting them there. They'll have to get to that same place of understanding. It may be one of the revelations that they have following stream entry is that, oh, that there is a much greater significance to this virtuous behavior than just doing it because I'm supposed to do it, and it's not too late now that they know. Now they can use this far more effectively, right? I'm not sure what your question was, though, or if that addresses
So I'll frame it I'll use a personal frame. So when I went through what I believed was stream entry, I already had a cognitive understanding of impermanence and no self, but I was still really shocked at the real experience of those things. However, I didn't feel any difference in terms of rules, rites, and rituals, but I had been spending many years prior to that practicing virtue, or at least attempting to practice virtue. And so I was wondering if the practice of virtue while you're still a worldling makes it so that there's not as sharp of a distinction in that aspect of stream entry.
Well, yeah, what you will still as a stream entrant, you should be able to appreciate the benefit that came from your practice of virtue. You should be able to appreciate that every time I declined to speak or act out of craving, it helped me come closer to the place of awakening. And likewise for the self-clinging that underlies the craving. That just by following virtue, the rules of practicing virtue, I would say what you were doing was practicing virtue in a limited sense, but it still had a very powerful effect. If you can see from what we're saying now, is just simply that it has the potential for an even more powerful effect if you don't stop at the level of just, I don't want to sound derogatory towards what your path in the least, because I don't feel that way. But to, even to follow those rules blindly it's got to have an effect on your susceptibility to craving and self-clinging. It's got to have moved you closer to awakening. It's contributed to it. Now, it may not seem, I think what you're saying is it doesn't seem like such a I don't know. I'm not sure that I understand what you're saying still.
Okay.
I really want to answer your question though.
I think I'm just coming at it from the felt experience, that there's very much a felt experience of, if you can even say this, of no self. It feels different. I'm wondering, perhaps I can ask like this, what is the felt experience difference in terms of rules, rites, and rituals between the worldling and the stream enterer?
The experiential difference is that there's no longer any illusion of a magical power associated with rules, rites, and rituals. There's nothing magic about it. That at a deeper level, you can understand that the benefits that come from it are completely understandable in terms of causes and conditions. That these are not, that they're not magical, they're not supernatural. That practicing virtue isn't tapping into some supernatural source of transformation, but it's acting at completely understandable level of cause and effect.
Thank you.
Does that correspond with your experience?
Yes, I think it's a little bit harder to parse because I don't feel like I was under the illusion beforehand that there were anything other than causes and conditions motivating the actions.
Well, that's very good then. Yes, that explains why your experience has taken the form that it's done. But can you appreciate though how using the same practice of virtue from a place of deeper understanding can contribute to your further progress through the second to and through the second and third paths?
Yes, I think I can. I'm, as we've been talking, I've been trying to really parse my path so far, and I think something that I might feel is that there's a more, I can more clearly feel when I say, for instance, say something that may not have been as skillful during the day, and then I sit on the pillow and I can feel the way that that has influenced the mind more, with more precision. And I'm now starting to suspect that that is, that might be the place to really look.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you haven't already, read the mindful review section in the appendix of TMI. That's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, that's where the power is, that you look at it and you can see ways to use it that go way beyond.
Thank you.
Yes, so it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So you've already figured out what I was trying to communicate in that appendix, but you might find it interesting to just read it and compare it with what you've discovered on your own. Yeah. Well, I think an hour and 40 minutes. We've got some. We've got some other really good questions to look at, but I guess please join me in 2 weeks, and I'll deal with those questions as many new ones that come up as I'm able to. But I certainly felt like this was it was for me enjoyable, and I felt a productive and useful discussion. I hope that you all found it to be so as well.
Definitely.
Good. Well, wonderful. So may you stay well and healthy, and may your practice bear fruit. And I'll see you. I'll see you next time. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks,
Thank you, Culadasa. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.